Good afternoon and welcome to Collaborative Gain. My name is David Forrest. I'm the General Manager for Collaborative Gain's Senior Executive Councils, and I'm joined by Brittany Crown, the Director of our 365 program. Today's webinar is called Critical Thinking for Product Teams, and it's the second in our product discovery series. We're thrilled to be joined by Teresa Torres, who's not only the moderator for one of our product councils here at Collaborative Gain, but she's also one of the most respected and accomplished product discovery coaches in the industry. We join this webinar already in progress. Let's get started. Teresa, why don't you share a little bit about how the first webinar we did on product discovery and kind of your introduction to that bridges into the one that we're doing today with for critical thinking for product teams.
Yeah, perfect. So I'll start by saying if you didn't make the first webinar, there's no required kind of prerequisite to this webinar. So you'll be just fine. We're going to start kind of, this topic is self-contained. And then for those of you that were at the webinar, the first webinar, I think pretty late in that webinar, one of the things that I mentioned was I have a tool called the Opportunity Solution Tree that I use with teams to help them connect what they're learning in their discovery activities with the product decisions that they're making. And that's the tool we're going to talk about today.
Great.
The thing that I'll reiterate is this topic today is actually a dry run for me of a talk I'll be giving in London in just a couple of weeks. As a result, because it's a conference talk, I've asked Brittany and David to hold off from sharing the video or the slides until after that event. So it is on September 8th. As soon as the conference is over, all of the materials will be shared with you. I'm just trying to not have my talk become public before the event itself. And then in light of that, I would love it if, as we go through this, two things. If you have questions, please jump in. I would love feedback on what's clear, what's not clear. And then afterwards, if you have feedback on what was helpful, what you felt like you could apply, this is still very much a talk in progress. So my request for help to you guys would be for your feedback. Both good and bad. So please feel free to be candid. Okay, I want to confirm with David, are you able to view my screen?
I can see it perfectly, full screen mode and all. We're good to go.
Excellent. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to jump in with just a story back from when I was a product manager. So back in 2008, I was a product manager at a startup that operated online communities for university alumni associations. And like many of your product teams, my team had some tough challenges to address. Our customers were alumni associations. They loved our product. They were really excited about offering a community to connect their alumni. But alumni, our end users, didn't love us so much. Basically, whenever we launched a new community, we'd see a whole rush of traffic as alumni came to check out their new site. But over time, we would see engagement dwindle to a pretty predictable trickle. And I remember sitting with my team in a conference room with the intent of brainstorming how we can improve engagement. And we had actually just learned from a whole bunch of user research that alumni loved sending messages to their community. They actually asked for advice on everything from how to find their next job to how to, like, what neighborhoods they should live in their new city, which we were really excited to learn because this is exactly what we were trying to encourage. We did, however, uncover a pretty significant problem, and that was that nobody wanted to receive these messages. So while alumni were asking for help, almost nobody wanted to actually get those messages. And a lot of it is because we had alumni, for example, who lived in Chicago, and they were receiving messages from people in Dallas who were trying to sell their microwave, or somebody in Boston who was selling their house, or somebody in San Francisco who was looking for an internship. We realized that what we had done was we effectively made it really easy for people to spam their entire alumni network. Now, if you're like me, your brain is already working on how to solve this problem. But when I turned to my team and said, let's brainstorm, I got a surprising response. Seth, one of my engineers at the time, jumped in really excited and said, I know what we can do. We should integrate Google Maps. And so Seth had, I want to remind you, this was 2008. Google Maps API was still fairly new. He had just read about it. He was really excited about it. He wanted to integrate a map that showed where alumni lived around the world. But I was pretty taken aback by this suggestion. It felt like it came out of nowhere, and I was racking my brain trying to figure out how Google Maps was going to solve our spam problem. So I asked Seth. I said, "Hey, how does this help the fact that people are getting all these messages they don't want?" And he said, "It doesn't, but it'll drive engagement because it's cool." And I, again, a little bit frustrated, turned to my team hoping they would help me. And I got a whole bunch of blank stares. And then a couple people piped in and said, "Hey, we think maps would be cool." So at that time, I didn't really have the words to explain my frustration. But I did know intuitively that building cool stuff probably wasn't good enough. And really where I was feeling stuck was this idea of integrating Google Maps felt a little bit gimmicky. It didn't feel like we were solving a real problem. Now, I want to be clear, this isn't a story about I'm right and Seth is wrong. We're going to see in a minute that it's way more complex than that.
Hey, Teresa.
Really, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. We're getting a couple comments. Are you still on your title slide of critical thinking? Have you moved off of slide 1 yet?
We're still on the title slide.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to double check.
Yep.
A few folks weren't sure. Sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
No problem. I'll let you know when we switch slides so that everybody can know that they're in the right place.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, so again, this wasn't a story about am I right and Seth's wrong. It's really a story about me as a product manager wanting to include my team in the decisions about what we were building, but not knowing how to do it in a productive way. And today, so several years later, today as a discovery coach, I actually see this play out on team after team. So I started to think about what's going on here? How can we deconstruct this problem? And the first thing I realized, this is going to be our first slide change, is that ideas are seductive, right? So it's easy for us to generate an idea. We hear about a need and we immediately start thinking about a solution. It's almost automatic, right? And in most cases, that first idea, we love it. We fall in love with it. And when we fall in love with our ideas, we don't stop and think to examine it. We don't pause and reflect. We don't ask, is this idea any good? After all, we already love the idea. Why would we question it? This is what happened to Seth. So Seth is actually a really passionate, talented engineer. And he had learned about the Google Maps API. He got really excited. He was enthusiastic. He shared that enthusiasm with our team, and it spread. And the whole team started to get really excited about this idea. The problem is that when we're really excited about an idea, we aren't promiscuous enough with other ideas, right? So I struggled to get my team to generate ideas because they fell in love with this Google Maps idea. They wanted to figure out how they could make it work. It was a room full of engineers, and they just wanted to start creating. Same is true for designers, same is true for product managers. Here's the thing, we all love creating, right? It's why we do what we do. But the reality is, if we want to be good critical thinkers and we want to make good decisions, we need to resist the allure of our favorite idea long enough to consider other ideas. Now,
Teresa, I've heard promiscuous and seductive. I just want to make sure that this webinar is going to be PG-13.
That's as racy as it's going to get.
Okay.
Okay. So here's the thing. Don't get me wrong. The goal here is not to say Seth's idea was bad. The Google Maps idea may be a very good idea. But we know that when we generate more ideas, we tend to generate more creative ideas. And more importantly, when we consider other ideas, we set ourselves up to make what I call a compare and contrast decision rather than a whether or not decision. And a whether or not decision is a decision where we ask, is this idea good or not? Right? This is a very common question on product teams. Instead, we want to ask a compare and contrast question. Which of these ideas looks most promising? Let me go back for a second. The compare and contrast is what we do when we talk about a whether or not decision, we're thinking about good as an absolute trait. Is this idea good or not? Whereas when we think about a compare and contrast decision, we're thinking about good as a relative trait, which is going to lead to better decision making. I mean, the analogy I have to illustrate this is a photo of Usain Bolt, who for a long time was the fastest 100-meter runner in the world. Now, if you saw Usain Bolt running around a track and he was by himself, it'd be really hard to answer the question, is he fast? Because that's an absolute question. We don't have anything to compare him against. But if we saw him running on a track against everybody else, and this is a real photo of him taking off from the start, it's really clear how much faster he is than everybody else. And this is what we're trying to do with our ideas. We don't want to ask, is our idea good? That would be the equivalent on the left. We want to ask, of our ideas, which looks best? Now, for some of you, and probably many of you, you're already a little bit skeptical because you're thinking, hold on a second, we have way too many ideas. So that's probably true. Most of us have too many ideas. I want you to suspend that for just a couple of minutes. I'm going to come back to that. In this particular story, we considered one idea. And I'm going to come back to the problem of too many ideas. So let's return to kind of what were some of the challenges with my team. So not only did we fall in love with our first idea, and therefore we didn't consider other ideas, we also, as a team, didn't align around target opportunities. So it wouldn't have been enough for me to simply ask my team, hey guys, do you think reducing spam is our most important problem? That wouldn't have solved the conflict, right? Seth could have jumped back in and said, I don't think that opportunity matters. I think we should help people find alumni who live near them. That feels like a more important problem. And we would have just moved our argument from the solution space into the opportunity space. What we should have done instead was we should have taken a step back and asked, how might we increase engagement? And we should have taken the time not to jump straight to solutions, but to start to identify opportunities. And just like we don't want to ask whether or not questions in the solution space, we don't want to ask whether or not questions in the opportunity space. So we want to set up a compare and contrast decision and consider more opportunities. So this is pervasive. I often see teams learn, especially if they've worked with Marty Kagan or if they worked with Jeff Patton, they learn how to go from a solution to and reframe it as an opportunity, but they're not looking at sets of opportunities. So we're still making a whether or not decision about an opportunity. Is this opportunity worth pursuing? Rather than, of these opportunities, which looks most promising? Okay, so let me pause for a second and ask everybody, does this resonate with you? Are you seeing this on your teams?
Yeah,
David,
I can see the raise your hands in the thing if anybody's dealing with this, too many solutions and not enough kind of compare and contrast situations. I see about 10 hands, 11 hands, 12 hands. There's a lot of hands going up, so I think people, this resonates.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So let's talk a little bit about how do we prevent these mistakes. And I want to introduce you to, for some reason I lost control of my, there we go. Okay, so I want to introduce you to Anders Ericsson. Anders Ericsson is an academic researcher. He wrote the book Peak, The Secrets from the New Science of Expertise. And this book is a summary of his life's work trying to understand the differences between novices and experts. And we're going to get a little technical here. It's going to last about 1 minute, so bear with me. He argues that experts use more sophisticated mental representations than novices. So what do we mean by a mental representation? He defines it as pre-existing patterns of information, so facts, images, rules, relationships, and so on, that are held in long-term memory and that can be used to respond quickly and effectively in certain types of situations. And he argues that more sophisticated mental representations help experts deal with information, understanding and interpreting it, holding it in memory, organizing it and analyzing it, and making decisions with it. Now, this got me thinking, isn't this exactly what we need from our product teams? Something that allows us to understand, interpret, organize, and analyze all the information that we get so that we can make better product decisions with it. If I were to look back at what happened with my team back in 2008, here's how I would diagnose my team's challenges. I came to the brainstorming session with a depth of knowledge about our users. I had just completed an extensive round of user research, whereas Seth came to the brainstorming session with a depth of knowledge about technology, and he had just read about the new Google Maps API. We each came to our brainstorming session with different patterns of information. We were each relying on different mental representations that helped us make fast decisions. That's good, right? We want everybody on our team to rely on their expertise. The only problem is, as product teams, we may need to make fast decisions from a shared mental representation that combines all of our knowledge. So as I started to see this problem on a lot of the teams that I was working with, I happened to be reading this book at the same time, and I started to ask the question, is there a visual representation that will help teams develop a shared mental representation from which they can make fast, good product decisions? And that's what led to what I call the opportunity solution tree. Now, this tool looks really simple. It's actually pretty complex and powerful in practice. So I'm going to use the story that I opened with to illustrate how it works. And this is where we're going to get into some detail here. So if there's something that's not clear or you have a question, please jump in.
So Teresa, it might be worth taking 1 minute just for total clarity to just explain to everybody, and if this is not helpful for everyone who knows this, that's great. Just in your mind, what's the difference between opportunity and solution, right?
We're going to get into that.
Okay, good. So you're about to dive in. Perfect. Okay.
Yep. So we're gonna talk about how to build this tree. So it's going to start with a clear desired outcome. So in the case, a product team needs to be clear about what they're trying to achieve really before they can do anything, right? And in this context, it's going to be pretty important that the outcome be measurable. So for those of you who are using OKRs, think more of a key result rather than an objective. Now, my team in the story had a clear desired outcome. We were trying to increase alumni engagement, and we measured alumni engagement as weekly active users. But we see in the story that a clear outcome isn't enough. We also need to ask ourselves, what will increase engagement? And before we jump to solutions, we need to map out the opportunity space. And my belief is that opportunities should emerge from generative research. So by generative research, I mean customer interviews and customer observations. There's other types of generative research, diary studies, and so forth. Interviews and observations tend to be the most common ones. Our goal in doing this research is to uncover customer needs, pain points, opportunities to delight, opportunities to replicate success, and so on. So a key difference between opportunity and solution, to David's question, is opportunity is really, some people use problem language, like it's the problem versus the solution. I tend to use opportunities, as do lots of people in the industry, because an opportunity can cover, you find a customer who came up with a creative way to solve a need with your product. That's an opportunity to replicate that success. So it's not really a problem to solve, but it is an opportunity to bring on more customers in that same fold. So think about opportunities as broader than just a problem, but also opportunity to delight, an opportunity to replicate success. Maybe it's a want, maybe it's a desire. And then when I work with teams, I really want them to stay as user-focused as possible. So I try to encourage them to frame their opportunities as something a customer would actually say. And this helps us distinguish between a customer need versus a business need, right? So a customer is never going to say, I want to spend more money on this purchase, whereas a business might say, I want to increase revenue per customer. So in the example of my story, I might reframe my reduce spam opportunity as an alumni saying, I get too much email. And Seth, if his implied opportunity was alumni looking for who lives near me, he might frame that opportunity as an alum saying, who lives near me. And notice how neither of those are solutions, right? They're both, one is a problem, I get too much email, and the other is kind of is a broader opportunity of, I don't have a problem of not knowing who lives near me, but I would like to know. Now, fortunately, at the time of our brainstorming session, my team had just done a whole bunch of user research, and we easily could have generated a list of opportunities. We had learned all kinds of things. As I mentioned, we'd learned that people were getting too much email. But we had also learned that people wanted help finding a job. They wanted to stay connected to their alma mater. They wanted to know what their college friends were up to, and so forth. We had a long list we could have easily generated this long list of opportunities. Now, this looks like a fairly decent opportunity backlog. And I know a lot of teams have shifted from just delivery backlogs to also using opportunity backlogs. The question is, what do we do with this list? So what teams tend to do is they start prioritizing the list. That would be consistent with my question of, with setting up a compare and contrast question. We could ask which of these opportunities is most worth pursuing and prioritize them. But there's a problem with that. First of all, this is a fairly big list. But really, it doesn't make sense to compare like a big opportunity, like I'd like to give back to the community, with a more tactical opportunity, like I want to hire a recent grad. It's hard to compare a list when it isn't made up of like items. Also, this list isn't really distinct. So for example, hiring a recent grad or mentoring a student are both ways in which an alumni might give back to their community. So if we compare them against each other, we're comparing apples with fruit, right? I don't know how to compare an apple with fruit. They seem like one and the same. It just doesn't make sense, right? So this is where the opportunity solution tree can really help. I want to use the tree structure to start to organize and group like items together. And what this does is it starts to give me a hierarchy that I can now use to make decisions. So let me just walk through quickly what I did here. So I tried to group the opportunities that I heard in my interviews according to which ones were similar. So over here on the left, I have a new category that I labeled I need help. And there's different ways that alumni might need help. They need help finding a job. They need help with what neighborhood to live in their new city. Maybe they need help hiring a recent grad. And you can see as you look across the tree, this category, I want to stay connected to my alma mater, includes different ways they might stay connected. And I'd like to give back to the community, includes different ways they might give back to their alumni community. So this group, even just grouping them this way, immediately makes my list feel more manageable. First of all, what it allows me to do is I can look at these top 3 opportunities and I can prioritize them against each other without looking at any of their children, right? Because I kind of have these bigger buckets that I can say which is more important. So if I compare and contrast these top 3, what's really interesting if I look at this in the context of my story is overwhelmingly the #1 opportunity we heard from alumni was they want to turn to their alumni association when they need help. But what's funny is if we go back to the 2 ideas we were debating in the brainstorming session, Seth was focused on who lives near me, and I was focused on I get too much email. And neither one of those really fall into this category of I need help. Now, I probably at the time would have argued we can't get alumni help if we don't solve this too much email problem. And I probably would have argued these 2 opportunities are intrinsically linked. So that raises this bigger question, which is this even the right structure? If we have opportunities that are dependent upon each other and they're in different branches, maybe we didn't build our tree right. And this is when I work with teams, I really try to encourage them to create multiple tree structures because a tree structure represents how we're framing the opportunity space. And how we frame the opportunity space opens up a whole bunch of different possible solutions. So the more that we play with the structure of our opportunities, which is really, we're trying to structure what we know about our customers, it's going to change the way we think about solutions. So I want to walk through a couple of examples so you can get a feel for how structure might change. A really simple example is this opportunity. I need to hire a recent grad. So right now on the tree, it lives underneath I need help. And that makes sense. If I'm looking to hire and I'm having a hard time finding qualified candidates, and I believe people from my alumni community are uniquely qualified, then that's a way that my alumni community is helping me. But if instead I want to hire a recent grad because I want to give somebody in my community a chance, maybe this opportunity lives over here under I want to give back to the community. And there isn't a right or wrong answer here. It's not that it lives in one place or the other. what the teams need to ask themselves is, what are we hearing from our users? Do they talk about it as a way to need help, or do they talk about it as a way to give back? If we hear it as one or the other, then it should belong on that branch. If we hear it in both, maybe it should belong in both. And this is the key to this structure, is your opportunities should be structured in the same way that your users would think about it, or your customers would think about it. And this can take work, right? Last webinar, we talked a lot about continuous discovery. A lot of the teams that I work with are learning how to do continuous discovery, and they're playing with the structure of their tree over and over again. Every week they learn new things, and they go back and they say, based on what we learned, do we feel like this is the right structure? Now that was a pretty simple change, so I want to get into a little bit more complex one. So I said earlier that I would have argued in that room, if we had done this mapping exercise, that I need help is connected to I get too much email. And so if that's the case, my tree structure needs to reflect that. So here's a different way to organize these exact same opportunities. Here's what I did. I introduced a new top-level opportunity called I want to connect with other alumni. And underneath that, I added two sub-opportunities. One is I need help, and one is I'd like to give back to the community. Now I'm framing these two sub-opportunities as two sides of a marketplace, people who need help and people who can help. And then for their children, I'm trying to line up the two sides of the marketplace for what needs to come together. So for example, if I have an alum who needs help finding a job, and I have an alum who's hiring that type of person, I might look at what are solutions to bring those two sides together. And I can do that across all these sub-opportunities. And nothing has changed. I can still use my tree to prioritize my decisions. So I might say, is it more important to help people connect with each other, or is it more important to help people feel connected to the institution? And I can still make that prioritization. And if I choose over here, I might have to decide what's more important, the people who need help or the people who are offering help. Or I might say I need to look at how to bridge those two sides together. So this is a much bigger structural change, which might change the way I think about the problem space or the opportunity space.
So, Teresa, can we pause for just a second? Because I want to reflect back what I've heard, not having seen this tree before, to the extent that this is helpful. What I love about this is that you haven't talked about solutions at all yet, right? This is really is very cool that you're still very focused on what challenges or opportunities there are from your users based on your user research, which is really great. And what I hear you saying is that you want to group in large buckets. So you've kind of got this granddaddy, and I'll use the family tree metaphor. You've got this granddaddy idea of increasing engagement. And then you've got these parents, which are I want to connect with other alumni. But you are framing these parents using the language that most reflects what you're hearing from your users.
That's right.
And then you're saying, okay, you're making some judgment calls, or maybe not making subjective calls about what the children look like in the the cousins maybe. But I have a question for you. So, who lives near me? Does that not also in the Google API, the Maps API, does that not somehow fit under I want to connect with other alumni? If I know that they live near me.
Very next slide, we're going there.
Perfect. All right. So is what I said accurate so far in terms of how you were thinking about opportunities and the process of putting these in these major buckets?
Yeah, I think it's what I try to encourage teams to do is there always is judgment in this, but I think the key is that you're using your interviews to verify, did you get the structure right?
Yep.
So if you want to hear customers talking about these opportunities the same way that you've mapped them. Right, and so if we look at these two different structures, you can imagine alumni talking about it this way, in which case maybe the idea around I get too much email is really this pain point around I want to give back to my community, but I'm overwhelmed. Yeah. Whereas in this model, it's a little bit more, it's the same idea, but it's encouraging us to think of them as intrinsically connected.
Well, and it ups the ante on actually paying attention, very close attention to the language that they're using, the verbs that they're using. I want to connect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Keep going. Thanks.
And this is a moving target, right? Like when teams build these, it's changing every week as they learn new things every week.
Yep.
Great. Do we have questions from other folks on the call?
Yeah, so it's a good a logical point before we get into a little bit more. If there are questions or seeking clarification from Teresa, raise your hand, and I can unmute you and you can ask a question. If you still are, if we're still in kind of listen only mode for a few minutes while Teresa keeps going, that's fine as well. But we'll have plenty of chances, to field questions towards the end of the hour. Nope, I don't see any questions immediately, so let's press on.
Okay, perfect. So let's now use this tree to talk about why Seth and I struggled to agree, right? So Seth came to the meeting with a solution, and his solution lives here in between these two opportunities of I need help, where I'm moving to a new city and I want to know who lives there. But it also helps with I want to connect with alumni who live near me. And actually, to David's point, I could argue it also lives over on the right here underneath who lives near me, which may or may not belong under I want to stay connected to my alma mater, but hopefully that you see the point. I, on the other hand, walked into the meeting not with a solution idea, but with an opportunity space that I wanted to explore, right? So I had framed the brainstorming session in my mind as, hey team, let's generate solutions that fit between these two opportunities. Whereas Seth was framing it as much broader under this umbrella of increased engagement, and we disagreed. And it turned into this, a very common, what we see all the time is an opinion battle of my way of framing versus his way of framing. And neither one of us really had the language to talk about it. Whereas if we had done the work to map this out, one, the tree gives us a visual to all work from, but it also gives us language, right? So Seth and I, instead of arguing about whether Google Maps was a good idea or not, we could have talked about which of these pairs is most important to our customer. What happens most often? By solving one versus the other, how much value does that create? Right? When we choose and prioritize opportunities, usually those are much more strategic decisions than prioritizing solutions. And when we just prioritize solutions and we debate about which idea is better, we miss those strategic decisions. Okay, so here's the real piece of this, is that Seth and I were really just arguing over unlike things, right? I was advocating for a problem space. He was advocating for a solution. We were comparing apples to fruit, really. So here's what I want to encourage you. I don't like, if you create trees and you're using this to help your team make decisions and there's disagreements, you do want to set up compare and contrast decisions, but you don't want to compare across rows, right? When we compare across rows, this is the example of I'm comparing an apple to a fruit. It's a little bit, it doesn't make logical sense. Instead, we want to compare across siblings. So we want to first decide, in this case, which parent is most important. And then only after we've made that decision do we want to go down and look at siblings. And that's one of the values of this tree, is it helps us kind of structure our logical thinking to make sure that we're not falling into these kind of critical thinking errors where we compare apples to fruit. Now, for those of you at the beginning, when I said we didn't consider enough ideas, we're a little skeptical because you do have a lot of ideas across your teams. Let's come back to that for a second. So most of our teams do generate lots of ideas, but we tend to generate ideas across a lot of different opportunities rather than within one opportunity. So let's talk about the value of generating a lot of ideas. Our goal is to push past that first obvious idea, to kind of get the creative juices going and to find truly innovative solutions, right? So when we brainstorm across the tree, we might generate a lot of ideas, but we're primarily generating a lot of first ideas. We're not getting to that second or third or fourth opportunity or idea to deliver on that opportunity. And not only do we lose that creative benefit of getting to the second, third, and fourth idea, we also end up with a whole bunch of solutions that we don't know how to prioritize. Because again, we're not comparing siblings, we're comparing cousins, or we're comparing siblings with parents, because our solutions are spread out across our entire tree. So this is, to me, is a logical error, right? We're not using the structure of the tree to help us prioritize our opportunities and then focus our ideas. So rather than generating a lot of ideas across the entire tree, Um, or I'm sorry, I discussed this already. We don't want to compare across all of our opportunities, all those solutions. We want to compare just the solutions for a given opportunity, right? That's a real apples to apples to comparison. These are all ideas that will address the same need. So in this case, when I talk about generating a lot of ideas, I want to see a lot of ideas for the same target opportunity. So in this case, if I work my way down the tree, and as a team, we say, okay, our goal is to increase engagement. Of these first two kind of grandparent opportunities, we've decided connecting with other alumni is most important. And then we've decided the people who need help are the right side of the marketplace to focus on. And we're going to focus on this opportunity. I don't know who to ask for help. So we've made that decision row by row, and now we have a target opportunity. Now I want to see the team generate a lot of ideas for how to address that specific need. This is what gets us beyond the first idea, that second, third, fourth, fifth creative idea. So in this case, maybe we're coming up with ideas like, well, maybe we can limit the number of recipients that the alum can send email to. Maybe we actually give them criteria, like if you're selling something in Boston, only email alumni in Boston. And maybe we can use machine learning and actually recommend recipient criteria. We obviously could have generated many more ideas, but I'm going to use those three as our examples. So most teams are pretty good at coming up with 2 or 3 ideas. I really want to see people push to 12 to 20. It's not that there's something magical in 12 to 20. It's that I want to see a diversity of ideas. There's a lot around divergent thinking before converging. Hopefully everybody's fairly familiar with that. Once the team has gotten to a good set of diverse ideas, then want them to very quickly whittle down from their big set to a set of 3 to 5. And so I typically encourage people to just use dot voting for this. A lot of this is because research has shown that groups are very effective at evaluating ideas. And if we were choosing one idea, this would be problematic, right? Your designer is going to get upset about that. Your product manager is going to get upset about that. But to go from a large set to a small set, dot voting is very effective and pretty adequate. This gives us a set of solutions to now consider. And at this point, most teams would probably say, let's pick the top one and run experiments. Now, most teams think of experiments as A/B testing. So they think, let's build the top one and A/B test it and see what happens. I don't want my teams to do that because that's a whether or not decision. I'm asking, is Usain Bolt fast? If I only test one solution, I have nothing to compare it to. So what I encourage teams to do is to run experiments to help them choose between the set. Now, a lot of teams don't know how to experiment that way. So the way that I teach them how to do this is I say, okay, I want you to pretend like you had access to all the data in the world and that you had perfect data. What questions would you ask that if you had the answers would help you choose between these solutions? So let's look at some examples. If I had to choose between these 3 solutions, I might ask, how many people typically respond to a message today, right? So if I'm trying to understand how many people to limit a message to, I might want to know, well, how many people receive the messages, who opens them, how many people respond, how many responses does an alum need before they get a helpful response? If I'm looking at recipient criteria, I might want to do some pattern matching on the existing messages and understand, are like the examples I gave earlier around selling something in Boston, a house for sale in Dallas, or an internship in San Francisco, location is the obvious criteria. But what if somebody asks, how do I get a job in product management? Now a different criteria might be an area that you work in. So to really decide if this solution is adequate, I might need to do some pattern matching on different type of messages and what criteria might be useful. Whereas for this third one, I need to understand, like, can we do this? Like, do we have the machine learning expertise? Is our data set clean enough that we can actually make predictions based on it? Is this feasible? So if a team can generate, like, what would they want to know to be able to choose between these set of solutions, those questions can then turn into experiments. So for example, if I have a machine learning person on my team, they can start to run experiments on our data set and see how predictive it is. If a product manager could sit down and analyze the data on existing messages in our system. So sometimes these experiments are go look at the data you already have. Sometimes they're like maybe on this middle one, we might have a question around, are senders willing to choose recipient criteria, or are they lazy and they're just going to send to all? So that we might set up an experiment where we do some usability testing and we try to run through different interfaces that encourage people to select criteria. The goal here is we want to experiment across multiple ideas, so we're setting up the equivalent of a heat in a race. We're looking for, of the people in this heat, who's the fastest runner. So of these solutions, as we experiment across them, which one looks most important? And this is key. This goes back to that compare and contrast versus whether or not decisions. And the reason why I include this as a critical thinking piece is we know from decision-making and research, compare and contrast decisions lead to better outcomes than whether or not decisions. And the tree makes it visually apparent whether or not we're considering enough ideas. So if you, and I love this as a management tool, if you have your team use a tree to explain their thinking and their decision-making, and you glance at their tree and they're not considering enough opportunities, it's really clear because the tree's not very broad horizontally.
So Teresa, this is a good stopping point for a second, because we got a great question from JJ Kircher about this particular thing. So I'm going to unmute JJ and let her ask. Hold on one second. JJ?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm
There
here. My question, right. Wasn't expecting that. My question was, I might have missed how you narrow down the opportunity.
Yeah, so, the opportunity.
The opportunity, yeah. No, I get how you're doing that on the solutions, on the ideas.
Yeah, so the key so assessing and prioritizing opportunities is a little bigger than a little bigger topic than this webinar, but I'll give you the highlights. The first thing is the way the tree structure supports it is the team should be considering each set of siblings one at a time. So the way I think about that is each row in the tree designates a decision point. So first they should be asking, what's more important, connecting with alumni or connecting with the alma mater? And they should be prioritizing just those two things. And then a lot of the way that I have them do that is a lot of what you might, if you're familiar with opportunity assessment templates, like Marty Kagan has one, I think Jeff Patton has one. I teach teams to look at market factors, company factors, customer factors when assessing opportunities. But then they're doing it row by row. So if they decide connecting with alumni is the most important one, they can ignore this right branch of the tree. And then now they're just prioritizing, I need help against I'd like to give back. And then if they choose I need help, they're prioritizing just its siblings and they're ignoring the I want to give back branch. So it's, instead of trying to prioritize the whole big list, the tree is helping you kind of branch to just the parts that are relevant, given your prior decision.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, JJ.
Other questions?
We don't have any other questions yet. I did have a question for you, just in terms of, maybe it's related to the prioritization question. It was more in terms of implementing this approach, Teresa. So what I love about this is it gets the team narrowed down to the point where they're offering up solutions based on a very discrete need that comes out of user research. How do you deal with the potential for all of these different needs to feel overwhelming, right? Because now there's like, oh my goodness, there's so many different things we're trying to solve for. How do you, is that an emotional thing? How do you solve for that when you coach folks?
Yeah, one of the biggest questions I get is when it comes to prioritization is I get pushback in the form of, Teresa, all of these needs are important. We have to address all of them. That is true over time, right? So with time, a good team will start to address all of these opportunities. But if we want to be outcome driven, we're not looking for what's something we could do or should do. We're looking for what's the highest impact thing we could do right now that will drive our outcome. So for example, when I say I pick this opportunity, I don't know how to ask for help, I don't know who to ask for help as my target opportunity, it doesn't mean I'm not going to do the other things on the tree. It just means I'm not doing them right now. I'm doing this one first because I've determined if I solve this alone, it'll have a bigger impact than all the rest alone, right?
Yep.
And then once I've adequately solved this opportunity, I repeat the whole process. I start again. I go, okay, now that we've solved that, let's go back to the top of the tree. Which of these two opportunities do we think will have the biggest impact? And maybe, I don't know who to ask for help was the biggest part of I want to connect with other alumni. And so maybe that shifts the priority once we solve that to the other side of the tree and we start to focus on I want to stay connected to my alma mater. And those shifts happen constantly as the team is releasing and learning what's working and what's driving their outcome.
Yeah, that's so. I guess my follow-up to that is implementing this structure, implementing this opportunity tree solution approach solves a lot of problems, right? Certainly it gets people very grounded in user research and what people are actually saying and thinking along those lines. But I want that's my assessment of it. What are some of the biggest things that get solved by people implementing this approach in your mind?
Yeah, so I think you're spot on. It does really ground people in being user-centered. Because it's visual, it's easy for the team to align around it, right? In a lot of coaching sessions, I have teams spend the whole hour debating their structure of their opportunities.
Right.
And to me, what that means is that the team is structuring their thoughts, right? All this tree is, it's a visual, it's an external visualization of what the team thinks, of how the team thinks they're going to reach their outcome. So I often refer to it as a discovery roadmap, right? Like, yep. This is our roadmap for how we're going to reach our outcome. These are the opportunities that we see. These are the decisions that we've made. This is what we're pursuing. And it's hard for us to do that. As human beings, we think we're rational, right? Like, in our own heads, everything's rational, we're logical, everything makes sense. The problem with that is that our brains are exceptionally good at inferring from A to B, but we're not always good at recognizing when that inference is faulty. So if A, then B, it may not be true. It could be that if A, then C. And we don't remember to slow down and question that jump. So the tree helps us visually see those assumptions, right? Because we're assuming if we help alumni connect with each other, that will increase engagement. And we're assuming that if we help people ask for help, that will help them connect with other alumni. And we're assuming that if we recommend recipient criteria, it'll help them know who to ask for help. So each of the connections on the tree is an assumption that we have to test. And I often see teams that once they create a tree, they start to see those connections and they go, is that really true? Would that solve that problem? And then they pivot away to a different solution because they realize their idea wasn't going to meet that need. So sometimes for the people in the room that are on the call that draw, there's sort of this magical thing that happens when we draw our ideas, is our ideas kind of talk back to us, right? Like in our head, the idea makes perfect sense. And then we start to draw it and we go, oh, that won't work at all.
How do I know what I think? Yeah. How do I know what I think until I see what I say?
Yeah, it's that same exact idea.
Yep.
So when a team puts this on paper, they start to see their thinking and then they're able to question their thinking. And that's, from like a critical thinking standpoint, it's really this ability to examine what we think and to question those connections, question those inferences.
Got it. And so whether or not I need help is the exact right child to the I want to connect with other alumni parent is less important than the group agreeing that this is the direction to go down. Because it's not a right or wrong thing, correct?
Yeah, although, so because I teach continuous interviews, if week over week they do interviews and they never hear people saying I need help,
right,
then they should be questioning, is that really an opportunity? Even if the whole team agrees it is an opportunity.
Cool. So, hey, I want to open this up to questions. If anybody's got questions, Archie Miller, I think you've got one. Let me call on Archie. I'm going to unmute you, Archie. Oop. You are self-muted. Archie may not want to ask his question out loud, so I'll ask it for him. Can you use the top-level parent opportunities to create alignment across multiple product teams, or does each team need to create the entire model?
This is an awesome question. I get this question from the leadership at my clients all the time. Here's what I can tell you. This model works exceptionally well for a team. I have lots of product teams using this model, and I see it have a really big impact on their critical thinking. with a couple of companies, I have started to experiment with, is there a tree that covers the whole company strategy or the whole company product strategy? It wasn't designed for that. It does work to a degree. I think it's a little too early for me to say, yes, it works for that. But I think it could. So I think the tree is really recursive, right? It works at different scopes where you start at a broad scope, you do some research, you pick a target opportunity, you could define an outcome for that target opportunity and branch a whole new tree. I think when we're looking at across all product teams, there's some kind of dependencies and conflicts with org design that makes the tree fall apart a little bit that I'm still kind of working through. How does that work? So I can confidently say it'll work within a team. I've seen it work across teams, like maybe on the same product. But I think as soon as you're getting more complex than that, it gets messy.
Yep. Cool. I don't see any other questions, so I don't know if there's some things that you want to kind of close out with. Got about 6 minutes, and we'll take. Oh, we do have another one from Tim. Tim,
Yeah.
you're on the phone. You may have to punch in a code, Tim. If this doesn't work, I'll ask a question for you. Let's see if we can get Tim on the line here. There he is.
Can you hear me now?
We can. Welcome.
Me?
Yep.
All right. So this is related to the other one, but it's not talking about so much about cross-team communication. But have you used the visuals of this to communicate with stakeholders outside of the team? I totally see the value of using it within the team to drive the team conversation. Do people outside of the team get it when you say, here's where we're focusing on, and we've decided that this opportunity is more important than that opportunity?
Yes, absolutely. And I encourage all of my teams to do that. I think it's a really effective communication tool. I will say it drives people nuts because it's a way more logical tool than they're used to getting from their teams, right? So when product teams communicate to their stakeholders about ideas, it's really easy for a stakeholder to have an opinion about ideas. And if that stakeholder is more senior in the hierarchy, suddenly their opinion carries more weight. And that's a comfortable place for that stakeholder to be.
It's the hip.
As soon as a product team comes in with like a very logical, structured argument, it can be threatening to some stakeholders. So I'll take that versus the alternative of my team not having structured thinking. But there is that warning that does come with it. Sometimes people go, this is too structured, it's too logical, and it pushes people outside.
I just want to talk about my favorite idea. I don't want to talk about your structure.
Yeah. Why is my box over there and not higher up?
Yeah. And a lot of it comes up in coaching where we kind of cross the line from coaching to therapy is a lot of teams do this work. They do great discovery work. They map it all out. And they find that their stakeholders still come back with, I still want you to build my idea. And that's kind of the danger of teaching teams to work this way when the organization isn't ready to work this way. So I do think the tree helps with having those conversations, but it can exacerbate misalignment in the organization if the organization isn't fully aligned on true discovery.
Well, maybe more than exacerbating, it's exposing the misalignment.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks.
So I got another great question from Lauren Thomas Tavel. Let me unmute Lauren. Hold on. All right. Hey, Lauren.
All right. Hi there. Am I unmuted now?
You are.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, great. So our question is, why is the blue box or the top box in terms of your outcome phrased from the company's perspective and not from the consumer or user perspective? What's the thinking? Why wouldn't that go all the way up to the user phrase?
Yeah, I love that question. I personally think metrics should be focused from a customer point of view. Most of the teams that I work with, most companies set their metrics from a business point of view, right? So like in this story that I shared, our goal was to increase engagement. We didn't, as a product team, we didn't have an ability to change that, right? So if you have the ability to set your own metrics, I think all metrics should be customer focused. That's what helps resolve these conflicts between business need and customer need, right? A business should, I think product teams create value for customers or create value for businesses by creating value for customers. And a lot of businesses, that's not true, right? They create value for their business in a way that's tangential to creating value for their customer. So I think in an ideal world, that blue box is always customer centric. I think at most companies, it is often business centric.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. So we've only got 2 minutes left, and I think we should probably wrap up. I will say that, Teresa, really appreciate you sharing your thinking here. This was the second of two. Oh, you got some key takeaways. So let me
Yeah,
you do those, and then I'll wrap us up.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, if there's only one thing you take away from this entire talk, it's this first idea of compare and contrast decisions versus whether or not decisions. I think from a critical thinking standpoint, that's going to get you the biggest bang for the buck if you just do one thing. If the visual tool looks helpful to you, these are just the quick highlights of what we ran through. Start with a clear desired outcome, map out the opportunity space, play with the structure. That's the hardest part of this exercise. Choose a target opportunity by prioritizing row by row, and then limit your idea generation to your target opportunity rather than generating ideas across your tree, and then run experiments to choose amongst your top ideas. And then the final thing that I'll remind you with is just that this is a dry run of a pretty big stage talk for me. I would love your feedback. You can email me at teresa@producttalk.org or at teresa@collaborativegame.com.
Great. Teresa, thank you, and thanks for everybody for attending. This was the second of our series in the product discovery space, and it is admittedly kind of ninja level, tier 2 level thinking. So we appreciate Teresa sharing this tool with us and kind of how she's using it across the teams. And we appreciate everybody here attending and providing feedback to Teresa that she can have a great talk in London. Again, reach out to her, ask questions, and provide some critical feedback. We hope you enjoyed this, and thanks for attending, everybody, and we'll talk with you soon.